So I should have at least inherited some of that. And it didn't show up for quite a while, but eventually it did. But what I really wanted from my test was to break through some brick walls, or at least get some clues to help me with that. And I felt a little depressed because I had this list of genetic matches, people who match me based on their DNA results, extending from my closest match, who shared the most DNA with me, to my most remote match, who shared the least. It was over 1,000 people long. At that time, that seemed like a lot of people. It's nothing compared to what you're up against now. A lot of them did not have family trees attached to their results. Others had trees that were private. Many matches would not respond if I reached out to them using their email address, which is how you do it at Family Tree DNA. I was wondering if anybody out there was interested in genealogy, really, and why they actually took their test in the first place. There was really no good way to search the matches that I did have for a shared surname, unless, in addition to their family tree, the matching kit owner had created a separate list of the relevant ancestral surnames. Needless to say, many didn't take that extra step to make their results searchable by surname. If they did have a surname list, it often included just a few of their surnames, the ones they were most interested in, not all of them. And there was absolutely no way to search for a shared location in their family tree unless those two were added to the surname list. There's no way to mark matches and sort them into groups. And Family Tree DNA initially took a lot of small matching segments of DNA into account, into their total, that put some folks higher up my match list than they really belonged. My many remote matches shared so little DNA with me, really, that they should probably not have been in my list at all at Family Tree DNA. And then there were the experts, many of them quite new to this kind of research with autosomal DNA, since this was a new test and trying to work out what it could achieve themselves, who declared that autosomal DNA testing was best at helping adoptees and people who had mystery ancestors in the past 4 generations. That is back to great-great-grandparents. According to them, it really couldn't solve mysteries past that point. Well, I was one of those people by that time who knew all my great-great-grandparents' identities. My problems were in the early 19th century and in the 18th century. I started to ask myself why I paid good money for this test in the first place. I didn't really care about the ethnicity part, and it was changing all the time anyway. And it wasn't very accurate on that at the time. If it would only help back to my great-great-grandparents, I had wasted my money. In that case, my test might only help other people very closely related to me who were born out of wedlock or adopted, but alas, it would help me little to none at all. Thank goodness I didn't give up. I found enough matches who had known relationships to me that I knew there was something to be gained. And many of the matches shared ancestors further back than second great-grandparents. So there must be a way, I thought, logically, to tackle brick walls further back in time, regardless of what the experts were saying. So I made a lot of false starts. I didn't know what I was doing. I concocted a lot of reckless relationship theories based on individual matches, which later proved to be false because, I was new. I didn't know what I was doing. I was confused. But I continued to test Hope Springs Eternal at different atDNA providers like MyHeritage, Living DNA, and AncestryDNA. The only one I didn't test with was 23andMe because so many people there were more interested in their health related information rather than their family history. Thankfully, I was smart enough to test some of my close kin, particularly my father. And he, of course, had far more matches on his side of the family than I did, since I only inherited half of his DNA. And once I had tested him, I was able to know instantly whether a match was on my father's side of the family or on my mother's side. And it's very important to be able to tell the difference between the two. I tested 2 of my father's siblings, and they each have 50% different DNA than each other. So that was capturing more of my grandparents' DNA than I could get just from my father. And they had some completely different matches that would prove very useful with time on different families than my father had. And even more distinctive matches related to a different common ancestors. I found those when I tested my 90-odd-year-old paternal great aunt and her octogenarian first cousin, who died only a year after she was tested, who were even closer in generation to some of my mystery ancestors. And they help with even different questions with time. So let me pause for a moment and give some very specific advice. A lot of people ask me where they should test their autosomal or atDNA. And my answer is, without question, there's no doubt in my mind, your first test should be done with AncestryDNA. In fact, it might be the only autosomal DNA test you'll ever need at this point. And aside from 23andMe, you can download your results from Ancestry and upload them to most of the other sites and then activate for far less money than take a new test at some of those other providers. That does not work with moving. You cannot move your results from any other of the providers to Ancestry. Ancestry doesn't allow that. So you can start with Ancestry and download and move to other testers, but you can't move your results from other testers into Ancestry. Now, part of the problem I faced when I was new to this, and of course I didn't know it at the time, was that the autosomal test itself was a novelty and not enough people had tested yet. The number of testers you can compare yourself against is crucial in this game. And right now, AncestryDNA has left its competitors in the dust. It has over 20 million testers worldwide. 23andMe is next with about half to 2/3 of that number. And the rest are really in the back ranks within 1 to 5 million total testers each. The place where I started, Family Tree DNA, has one of the very smallest databases of atDNA testers. And even though they were pioneers in the field, and I had tested first with them, they continue to be among the least useful of the companies offering this test. They're the only US provider, however, of the commercial Y-DNA test, and that is a crucial tool. So in that regard, they're way ahead. Why is the size of the tester database so important? Well, because when you are looking at mysteries in your family tree dating back to 2 or 3, even 300 years ago, which is about the limit, you need to find a significant number of people, say 30 to 100 or so, who have inherited the same DNA from the same common ancestors that far back in time. The shared DNA from remote ancestors exists in relatively small segments, most under 60 centimorgans in length, but greater than 15 or 20 centimorgans. And only a small subset of the descendants of those remote ancestors will have the same DNA from the same people in their background. If the database of testers is too small, you probably won't find enough people with family trees you can access who have inherited the same DNA from the same remote ancestors. And your chances are better if the testing database is large. The larger, the better. Furthermore, if you don't have access to enough trees associated with the matching groups that we call clusters, you will not be able to find the patterns of descent that unify the trees within that cluster and point to some aspect of your shared lineage that you didn't already know about. The size of the database is a key factor, therefore. Now, some of you who are a little bit more sophisticated and experienced, shall we say, you're probably asking, what about not being able at AncestryDNA to see the precise links of DNA that you share with these people, their coordinates, stop and endpoints of the different segments, and where they lie on which chromosomes? It's true. AncestryDNA doesn't have a chromosome browser or any other visualization tool in which you can see precisely where the segments that you share with a particular match lie. Unlike most of the others, Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, on which chromosomes of the 23 pairs or which parts of which chromosomes. So you cannot map the shared segments or compare the location of segments to other people in the cluster. How do you know that the matches are valid without doing that across a whole cluster of people that you think have common descent and got their DNA that they share from the same ancestors? Don't you need a spreadsheet for all the matches that relate to a particular genealogical problem that compares what links of DNA you share with them and where those segments are located on the chromosomes? Well, if you read professional articles that try to argue from DNA, you would think that that was absolutely necessary. But my answer is no, you don't. Absolutely not. You don't need any of that necessarily. And that's good news for you. Now, don't get me wrong. Chromosome browsers and visualization tools can be very helpful. And knowing the links and location of segments is sometimes useful and even essential, especially if you're working with someone who doesn't know who their recent ancestors are, or if you share multiple lines of ancestry with an individual and want to distinguish which segments came from which ancestors. It's also necessary if you want to map your genome on both sides of your family and show which segments of your DNA came from which ancestors using color coding. You have to know where the segments are and where they stop and start for that process. And once you've mapped your entire genome, you'll always know from the location of the shared segment what lineage a new match must share with you. We call that tool DNA Painter. And it's very helpful if you can get to that point in your research. But for most people, that's a late stage development that they actually achieve a full map of their chromosomes, their genome by ancestor. Chromosome visualization would be essential too if you had unexpected ethnic ancestry. Know which part of which chromosome is associated with that ancestry and want to know which family gave rise to that aspect of your ethnicity. So my great aunt shows a very small amount of Eastern European Jewish ancestry, for example, in her ethnicity results. And my father has 1% Senegalese. And that's been very consistent over all the times that they've run that chip and updated it on the ethnicity. Both of those were surprises to me. And I can find out what part of which chromosome is relevant easily on Ancestry or GEDmatch. But I would need to know what family name is associated with that particular chromosome and that segment of that chromosome to know who to apply that ethnicity to in my family tree. But otherwise, you don't need any of that. You don't need the chromosome browser for most of your questions if you're working with remote ancestors. Say 5 generations ago or beyond. Or if you want to know why a specific person in your list matches you, you can usually rely on shared matches for that, particularly if they have one set of distant shared ancestors in common with you who have contributed the DNA that you share. And that sort of circumstance accounts for the vast majority of your match list, by the way. Once a match has been reliably sorted into a well-defined cluster of people who match both them and you, and that's what I'm calling a genetic cluster, the family trees of the matches in the cluster are the best guide to finding the lineage that all of you share and from which ancestors the shared DNA came. Now, you can be sure without seeing where the shared DNA specifically lies in the chromosomes that everyone in a well-defined genetic cluster does share basically the same part of their genome, whether you can map it using a chromosome browser or not. Otherwise, they would not fit into the cluster in the first place. That's basically why Ancestry doesn't offer chromosome visualization or a chromosome browser. The results are useful without it to most people. And from Ancestry's point of view, there are privacy concerns about sharing specific location data on shared segments between different users of their test. So that's the principle that this entire talk is based around. I want to show you with a specific example how to create genetic clusters on AncestryDNA and how to interpret them to your advantage. You paid good money for the test after all. Here is your chance to get some value for that investment without a complicated process and lots of number crunching. Now, I'm not saying it's not a time-intensive process, but it's not hard to understand. It's only difficult in terms of the amount of work that you'll have to do. But you've already spent hours and hours in libraries and archives and online in different subscription sites trying to find these answers. So the effort required is certainly less than all the wheel spinning that you've already done. Now, before I proceed, AncestryDNA has other advantages too. And first of all, the company allows more freedom in sorting matches and searching match family trees than any other site, in my opinion. You can use both surnames and geography and the two linked together to search your matches. So you can search for Smiths, or you can search, that is, people with a Smith name in their family trees, or you can search for Hempstead County, Arkansas in somebody's family tree as a birthplace and get results, as long as their trees are connected to their results and are not locked in some way, which many of them are. But you can also put the two together. So you could search your match list for Smiths born in Hempstead County, Arkansas, and get that result as well. You can mark matches with color-coded dots to which you can apply labels. That way, once you have isolated a cluster of matches that belong together, you can mark them all and come back to that list time and time again. You can also limit your results to just the people that you have marked with a particular dot and search within that group to find patterns of descent within that group or within your cluster. You can add notes to individual matches to explain why they match you. You may even be able to tell whether your matches are on your father's or your mother's side if you can assign ethnicity results to your father and mother differently, or have one or the other tested. And Ancestry has only recently introduced this, where if you do your ethnicity and they can split it by parent, you can look at your mom and say, well, my mom, yes, she does have some German ancestry, but my father does not. So that has to be my mom and that has to be my dad. Once you've done that and assigned one to each parent, now Ancestry can actually divide your matches, most of them, not all of them, between your father and mother, and assign some of your matches to both sides. Some of them will be related on both sides of your family tree. And then there are a few that are indeterminate. Now, except for that bit about the notes, I think all the sites offer note fields on matches. These tools are far more limited or simply unavailable on all the other sites. And honestly, without such tools, I'm just not sure how you would use the process I'm teaching here, barring a lot more work. That lack of tools, and above all, the limited size of the databases for these other test providers, along with the absence of flexible searching of matched family trees on the other sites, makes this process impracticable and far less productive when it is practicable. So it's little wonder that those transfixed by the idea of needing a chromosome browser often have little faith in the process that I'm about to discuss, and often don't believe that autosomal DNA is helpful for anything other than cold cases and recent ancestral mysteries to second or third great grandparents. Actually, most of them have updated to third great grandparents now. I find actually that it's helpful far beyond that, however. There's some downsides to using Ancestry, and I want to mention those too. You must be a current member of Ancestry.com to get the most out of your AncestryDNA results. Your access to matched family trees is limited without it. You won't get hints about common ancestors that you share with your matches automatically based on your two trees without that subscription. And you cannot use Ancestry tools to perform genealogical research on your matches without a subscription. And you're going to need to perform a lot of research on your matches to get the patterns down that exist within a group that you assign as a cluster. That research is essential because genetic matching without conventional genealogical research is just useless, meaningless. The good news is that you can join Ancestry for a 6-month period when you want to concentrate intensively on analyzing your results and take breaks in between. And also, you could share your results with somebody else who is a current member, and that person could use their account to analyze your DNA results with all the tools that are available through Ancestry.com. I should really try to show you how to do that at some point. If you want to share your DNA results with another person to help you analyze it. We get that a lot at the library. I'll have somebody share their DNA results with me through my personal account so that I can look at them and annotate them if necessary, create clusters and so forth to help them answer a genealogical question. That is possible. And the other thing that is a bit of a demerit about Ancestry.com is that AncestryDNA does not permit you to use another site called Genetic Affairs to auto-cluster your matches. You say, well, what is auto-clustering? Well, that is an automated way to sort all of your matches into distinct clusters without doing all the laborious work that I'm going to show you tonight yourself. Once Ancestry did allow Genetic Affairs to do auto-clustering on its site, but in 2020, they sent a cease and desist letter, a series of them actually, to Genetic Affairs because you do have to share your Ancestry credentials with Genetic Affairs to have that done. And because it takes results data off the Ancestry proprietary site where it cannot be protected. So Ancestry, for legal purposes and ethical purposes, decided to resist Genetic Affairs. The other sites, for the most part, still allow Genetic Affairs to do auto-clustering. In fact, MyHeritage has adopted it as a feature and licensed it as a technology to use directly on their site. And the others permit you, for the most part, to use it as well, like FamilyTreeDNA. So you can have your clusters identified automatically for you using that technology, but not at Ancestry, unfortunately, where most of the people who have tested have tested. It's still possible to run Genetic Affairs on most of the other sites, as I said, and with the clusters pre-sorted, a lot of the work is already done for you, and you can simply study the trees of each match within a cluster, trying to figure out the common ancestors and common genetic inheritance that account for it. So, beginning the process. I've said that genetic clusters are the name of the game. So, how do you form one? That is the very first step. You have to decide who belongs in the cluster and who doesn't of all the matches that you have. It's really kind of simple to get started. It has to do with looking at shared matches. You pick a match. For cluster purposes, let's call that person, him or her, a primary match, the first match around which you will build your cluster. That should probably be someone who shares between, say, 20 centimorgans and 60 centimorgans of DNA with you. That's sort of a statistical measure of the extent of DNA. It's not really a length measure, but it is an extent measure. And then you should look at his or her shared matches. You might write down all that list of shared matches for your primary match and write it down from the person who shares the most with you to the person who shares the least with you both. Then you look at each of those shared matches, the people who match both you and your chosen primary match, and switch to their shared matches tabs. If their shared list is very close to the one that you just wrote down, then that individual belongs in that cluster. But if they don't have that same, more or less, list of shared matches, you should ignore them and leave them out of the cluster. And there'll be several of those in each cluster that you're trying to create. Once you've got the people narrowed down who belong against the people who don't, you choose a color dot, give it a label like mystery cluster number 1 or Allred Family cluster, for example, and then apply that dot to each person that you verified belongs in the cluster. Gradually, your cluster will begin to grow. It could be large or small, anything from 15 to 20 people who match you and match one another to well over 100 sometimes. And that's still that's a pretty short list when you consider that your entire number of matches at Ancestry could be 70,000 people long or more out of 25 million testers. Now, why shouldn't you begin your cluster with someone who shares more than 60 centimorgans or so with you? Because people who share more DNA than that may be very closely related to you and share multiple family lines. They really could belong in multiple clusters. You want to refine this list down, this particular cluster, to just the folks who descend from one shared remote ancestral couple whose identity you may or may not already know. Those closer matches that show up in the shared match list at the top of it, who share the most DNA with you and your principal or primary match, those above 50 centimorgans, however, are important because their family trees will be consistently pointing to one aspect of your lineage. They're probably pretty close relatives whose shared ancestry should be apparent to you either initially or with only a little bit of research on their family trees that they have already posted. Those closer matches who tend to match the cluster, and particularly those who are of known relationship, are your guide to what part of your ancestry this particular cluster is associated with. In fact, it's a good idea before you do any clustering at all, just to mark as many of the people who share a lot of DNA with you as to how you think they relate to you based on their family trees. And I would do that with a little note on each one rather than a colored dot, because you're going to need the dots for your clusters. And these nearer matches, you're just going to use as guidebooks or pointers as to what part of your ancestry you're dealing with any individual cluster. Conversely, you should probably ignore most matches that share below 20 centimorgans with you, and certainly below 15 centimorgans. Many of them are false matches and totally misleading. They may match you simply because your ancestors have the same ethnic background, or come from the same source region in the old world, or are related so far back that you'll never be able to determine through records how you're related to them. We call many of these matches that are very small, have very small shared segments, identical by state rather than identical by descent. In other words, it's almost a fluke that they match you. It's some coincidence more often than it is anything related to genealogy that you can trace. Thankfully, AncestryDNA cuts you off your shared match list at about 20 centimorgans to avoid that very pitfall. There are times you might want to look for cluster members below 20 centimorgans shared, but the reasons for that are a little too involved for me to explain here. I want to keep this as simple as I can. So if you look at the little chart to the right, my point here was to say, okay, let's say I or my tester is that person on the far lower right-hand side. And I want to find somebody to compare myself against, a primary match who only shares that couple at the top who are married, the common ancestors, don't really have any other shared DNA with me. And maybe I know the husband's side of the family quite a bit, but I know nothing about the wife's side of the family, which is why it says unknown in the top right-hand corner. So what I'm going to do is try to choose someone who branched off, whose ancestry branched off as close to my mystery couple as possible. In this case, I want to choose, I've got the opportunity to choose one of my distant uncles who moved away from North Carolina to Kansas. Now, why would I want to choose that guy as opposed to someone who stuck around in Randolph County or Montgomery County, one of the other siblings? Well, because when they moved away, there's a real good chance that they stopped marrying any of my other relatives. If they stayed here over the generations, they probably married other people who are related to me, and that complicates the DNA picture a lot. I really just want to show I want a cluster built around somebody who probably only shares the one set of ancestors that lived so long, long ago. And the spouses that are marrying into that family that moved to Kansas are almost certainly, the little X's are showing that they almost certainly don't relate to me or any of my other, the people who married into my line. So that means the DNA I share with that individual, that optimal primary match around which to build my cluster, probably just shares DNA from known and unknown couple at the very, very top. And that's exactly what I want, hoping that it will be the unknown couple. Now, what kinds of questions can you expect to answer with your cluster? Well, you might discover the broader family of an ancestor whom you knew little about. You might verify the connection for descendants of illegitimate relatives who came through an illegitimate line or non-paternity event, which might validate a bastardy bond or a family story about their paternity. You might discover a female ancestor's maiden name. You might find out what happened to collateral lines through aunts and uncles who moved away from your family somewhere out to the west or south. You might get hints as to where certain families lived before they arrived in the neck of the woods you're familiar with, or where they moved afterwards. And you might find more remote ancestors that you never knew about through your prior conventional research in records. You can select the primary match to begin a cluster at random, just out of curiosity, but you can also select a primary match in a targeted way by searching family trees of all of your matches for ancestors you know about already and where you have genealogical brick walls. I advise choosing as your primary match a descendant of the family you're interested in studying that links close to them generationally, as I said before, and preferably choose a descendant of a known member of the family who moved away from the others, possibly south or west. And we talked about the reason for that you hopefully won't share any other family lineages with them in the recent past. And the DNA that they have and the DNA they share with your common matches will have to go right back to their parents and nobody else. The resulting cluster will be targeted to the question that you have in mind if you happen to have DNA from ancestors those particular ancestors, or your tester does. Just remember that no tester will have meaningful DNA from every ancestor, and actually from fewer and fewer of them as you go back further and further in time. Until sometime around 300 years ago, no individual ancestor will have left enough unique DNA to a descendant to do this kind of work at all. So you may have to test several people in your immediate family. Somebody else in your immediate family has different DNA from those ancestors and might have enough to work on one particular ancestor you have in mind, whereas you don't. You might even have to get access to the results of remote cousins who've already tested. I've done that sometimes. I've approached people on AncestryDNA that I only met on AncestryDNA and asked if they would share their match list with me so that I could perform some cluster research and explain to them exactly what ancestors I'm trying to target and find out more about. And oftentimes they'll agree to do that if you've had some successful rapport with them in the past. Let your DNA or whatever DNA you have from a tester, lead you to your question, your genealogical question, rather than trying to force the DNA you have at hand through your tester to answer a question that you already had in mind beforehand. You and your immediate kin might not have inherited the appropriate DNA for an issue that you really, really want to solve, and your efforts will be in vain. But you can at least count on having significant DNA from each one of your third great grandparents. After that, there's nothing guaranteed. That's when your ancestors start falling off your genetic family tree. In other words, there'll be some of them after that that will have not left you enough unique DNA to do work on their lineage. So now, this is where I start working without a rope. In real time, I will begin the example that will follow us through the rest of this talk. Now, this is a cluster that I was aware of broadly in my father's results, but I hadn't studied them in depth or defined them carefully before I started planning this presentation a week or two ago. It's about my Allen family that married into the Allreds. Jonathan Allred, as you'll see in the list of children on this page, born 1812, died 1872, married Nancy Allen, who was born in 1819 and died in 1884 in the 1840s. She was from neighboring Montgomery County, North Carolina, where records are sparse, because of courthouse fires, and there were a series of them leading up to 1843. So very, very little in the way of local records remains. There's some state level records, and of course there's the federal census, with the exception of 1820, which has been lost for Montgomery County. So there's a lot of missing records there. And that leaves us with questions, right? When we don't have conventional ways to do our research, we have to find alternative ways. I knew her father and her siblings through my conventional research, and I've listed them here. The parents are at the top, and all of her brothers and sisters are down below. There were, I think, 11 or so of them. Due to a legal dispute, even though her father died before the last courthouse fire in 1843, his will was recopied later in Randolph County from a private copy that had been kept because of litigation in the courts. And actually, my ancestor, Jonathan Allred, was responsible for causing the problem. He apparently handled the estate in a way that the other heirs didn't particularly care for. And so, and concealed the will and some other documents. And so he got into a lot of trouble and there was a big lawsuit. So that's thanks to his miscreants. That's why I know as much as I already do know about Samuel Allen and his wife. Now the Wrights, Elizabeth Wright, the wife of Samuel Allen, I only found out about her because of autosomal DNA through a different cluster, not this one. Her father left a will in Moore County, North Carolina in the late 18-teens, but even though they lived near the county line, I never thought to look across there. And I found a cluster related to her ancestry, and my father's results made me want to look for the parents of some of this particular William Wright, to see if there's any evidence that my Elizabeth Allen was his daughter. And sure enough, right in his will, after I found that DNA, it led me to his will, and his will mentions her as Elizabeth Allen. And then there's a court record that associates Samuel Allen with some of his other children in Randolph County, and I got it. I'm like, there it is. But there's more DNA involved that my father has inherited from this couple. And that's what this particular cluster is all about. The good thing about this family is a lot of these children moved west, just like I was talking about earlier. So they stopped marrying local people when they went out west. And when I found descendants among my father's DNA matches, that's where my cluster started, with one of those people. By the way, if I had not tested my father or his brother, I would have had very little access to these matches through my own results or my aunt's results. So like I say, keep testing. Those tests can be really inexpensive around Christmas time and other holidays. Just buy them up and hand them out like candy to your relatives who are willing to take them, because you all have very different DNA. You want to exploit as much of it as you can while you have the opportunity, particularly with relatives who are in the prior generations, closer back in time before they're gone and unavailable. That DNA will be lost when they are deceased. The first step was to choose a primary match around which to build my cluster. I have all this information about Nancy Allen Allred's siblings. I want to know more about her father's family and my deepest, darkest pre-1843 Montgomery County, a sinkhole. So for my primary match, I'll choose a descendant of one of her siblings who went west. And now I'm going to try to share a different screen with you of DNA matches. Let's see, where is this screen? If I can show it. Sorry, folks. I think I've got it. Can you see my father's name, Larry M. Cates, now at the top?
Yes.
The right screen. Now, it's really important to know what side of the family you're working on. And in this case, the Allens and the Allreds are on my father's side of the family, my father's side of the family. Now, AncestryDNA recently, this is his overall match page now. It's different than it used to be in the very, very recent past. But Ancestry did this ethnicity inheritance split between the two parents of all their testers. They can actually show what ethnicities are on which side of the family. Because this is his mom's side, this is his father's side, I identified paternal and maternal based on these ethnicities, because I knew that most of the German DNA, which is this dark teal segment right here, has to be on my paternal grandmother's side of the family. She's the one who has all the German. You can see there's no dark teal on his father's side. So that's how I was able to determine which side was paternal and which side was maternal. And once I identified that, Ancestry divided his results into matches who were on his father's side and on his mother's side. That's extremely important. There are 25 matches here on both sides. Some of those are near relatives. And then there's some 4,000 or so matches who are assigned neither to one or the other side. So just to be safe, because I know the Allens are on his father's side, I'm going to look just at his paternal matches and do my search there. Now, one of Samuel and Elizabeth Wright Allen's children who went west was Zilpha Allen, who married Enoch Spivey. And they ended up in Nacogdoches County, Texas, and then went on to Henderson County, Texas. So if I can find any of Zilpha Spivey's, Allen Spivey's descendants as matches for my father, I can be pretty sure that that DNA came from her parents, Samuel Allen and Elizabeth Wright. And I'm hoping that a lot of it will be from her father, because I know who her mother's family is now. So what I'll do is I will search for anybody. Now that's a way to search for the match name, the username of the match. Sometimes their real name, sometimes not. You want to put the surname in the family tree here. So I'm going to look for Spivey's. And I could put a birth location as well, but I don't need to do that in this case. I'm not looking for some common surname. Spivey is a pretty uncommon surname. So if I search for that, here's one who's descended from Zilpha Allen Spivey. I've already marked, but the one I'm going to work with tonight is VG right here, who's managed by someone with a username afarmer730. When I click on her, I'm going to show you her family tree. You can see there she is. There's her mother, her maternal grandmother, her maternal grandmother's father, her great-great-grandfather and mother, Zilpha Allen Spivey, according to her family tree, is her ancestor. So in order to think about using her as the basis, the primary match around which I'm going to build a cluster that I'm trying to look for more Allen information from, I'm going to look at her shared matches. I'm going to move from the tree tab to the shared matches tab and see who matches both me or my father rather, and VG. And okay, I told you earlier, I don't want to really add anybody to this cluster who isn't who's sharing too much DNA with me, but I do want to make sure that the people who share a lot of DNA with my father and this person are consistent with my theory that the DNA that we share, what my father and she share, comes through the Allen family. First of all, my uncle, okay, yeah, that's my uncle, Roger Cates. Both of my father and he are descended from the Allens, obviously. This person, I looked at their unlinked tree, which I can't search, by the way. That search I just did wouldn't work with that tree because it's unlinked. But oftentimes people will have a tree, they don't know how to link it to their results, and it does reflect their ancestry. I would say probably three times out of 4, it does. Sometimes they're unrelated family trees that don't have anything to do with the person who's tested. But this individual is descended from my great-grandmother's brother, Cicero F. Ruth. And in fact, it was Cicero's grandmother who was Nancy Allen, who married Samuel, who married Jonathan Allred and was the child of Samuel and Elizabeth Wright Allen. So that's consistent. So I kind of got the sense now that, yeah, I'm on the right track. I can begin my cluster because the neuro matches are pointing in the right direction that I expect them to based on the family tree of VG. So also, if you look down here, I've already marked this guy. He descends from Zilpha Allen Spivey as well, and he's a shared match. He matches both my father and VG. So there's even more evidence that the DNA my father shares with VG at 28 centimorgans across one segment is indeed descended from Samuel and Elizabeth Allen and nobody else. Now, I want to click on that detail here to show you exactly what this is referring to. I share my father shares one segment at 28 centimorgans with VG, but it's part of a longer share of 31 centimorgans. And some of that DNA is unweighted because it's just too common and it should be excluded from the analysis. The 28 centimorgans is the key part of it. Calculating back from the family tree, I can tell that my father and this match are fourth cousins exactly. And the chances that a person who shares that much DNA with you, 28 centimorgans, is your fourth cousin is 20%. So, it's all quite consistent. That's what this little chart is telling me. At 28 centimorgans, there are just dozens and dozens, scores of different types of relationships that could be involved. But this one's a pretty common one for the amount of DNA that's shared in this case. The amount of DNA is not that important at this remove with shared ancestors that are this far back, because, it's such a small segment. It could be related to just countless different relationships between your tester and your tester's match. When you share a lot of DNA, the number of different relationships that it can be diminishes a great deal. Okay, so what I could do, I could go down this whole list of shared matches. That is people who match my father and VG. And I could just write down all their usernames as a reference because I need to check each of them in turn and make sure that their shared match list is pretty much the same as this list that I'm looking at right now. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is just to go ahead and mark all of them with a dot that you choose. Before I do that, I'm going to add a note to BG, and I can do that by clicking on this little tool right here where it says Add Note. And I wonder if I can move this over so I can type. Yep, good. So I'll just say descended from Zilpha Allen, married Enoch Spivey, and click Save. And now you can see that that little note is right there in the middle. Whenever I want to change it, I can. If I want to remove it, I can, but I will never be in doubt again as to why this individual matches my dad. Every time I see this match, I will know what the relationship is, which is likely the explanation for the match. But now let's say I want to go ahead and put some of these more distant matches. I'll start with Carrie Sue, even though she's a little over 60 centimorgans. And let's see. That first. You see that little pencil tool there out to the right? That's how I can edit what groups people belong to. So I'm just going to go ahead and put everybody into a new group. Well, I'm going to click on the pencil. And instead of remove from group, I'm going to add to group. And I'm going to repurpose this one for that. So I think I've used all my uncle's matches. I should have thought about that. I can change the label on this one from right to Allen Deep. That's what I'm going to call it, because these matches go back potentially before Samuel Allen, some of them. Okay. And once I have created that Allen Deep, as long as I keep that checked, I can add as many of these people at one time as I want to by clicking on the little checkbox in the top right-hand corner. I can go down the whole list and add them all at one time to this proto cluster. It's not truly a cluster because I haven't checked each person yet. I've got to check each of their shared matches to make sure that they're full of these light blue dots that I'm adding to them right now. And I can click as many as I want all the way down the list. It's quite a long list. Sorry for the ponderousness of this process. It's going to go down to about 20 centimorgans shared. We're at the 29 level right now. As you can see, I've added notes to a lot of these people because I've already done the research before I got in here tonight, obviously. Wanted to make sure that I had made notes about how they're all individually related with the aim of finding out what the patterns were within this group. There are multiple people within this group who are descended from the same individuals. And when you see patterns across the cluster, you know that those patterns are related to your more remote ancestors who are somehow connected to the Allens that started this whole business. And it gives you new avenues of research that you can use to illuminate those Allen common ancestors. I think I'm getting close to the end now. And I'm going to add them all to the group once I've got them all checked. And lo and behold, every single one of them has that blue dot now. That's a cluster start, okay? But now I need to go back through them and check each one of them. I'm not going to do each one. This is kind of like a Julia Child cooking demonstration. You know, I'm showing you how to do the souffle, but I've already got the finished souffle in the oven ready to show you so you don't have to wait for it to cook. What I've done is I've marked everybody who belongs in the cluster with a star. So let's say Jim Allen here. I'm going to look at Jim Allen. I said he does belong. And how do I know? Well, because when I click on shared matches on Jim Allen and go down the list, look at all the blue dots. He's got a lot of blue dots. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So I know, yes, he does belong in there because the shared matches list is pretty much the same or very similar. However, there are some people in this without that star who don't belong. And I'll show you an example of that. This Terry Roberson, for example, does not belong in the cluster. Look at his shared matches list or her shared matches list. I'm not sure which. You know, there are a lot of gaps in there. And that makes me pretty sure that that person doesn't belong. And when I want to get rid of somebody, I just click on the add edit groups and unclick that blue dot and take them out. We'll do another one here in a second. Let's take another one that does belong, like Brian Littoral, for example. Look at his shared match list. You look at him, almost every one of his matches is blue dot, with a few exceptions. So yeah, he does belong. But if we look at another one, let's take Sandra Botanis here, for example. It's already identifying some other ancestors that we share. So, and none of them have anything to do with Allen's according to our family trees. These are all generated by comparing our family trees and other family trees that may connect our trees together, not ours, not mine, not hers, but other trees in the system, and identifying potential possible common ancestors that may account for the DNA that we share. But if I look at our shared matches, that's the real test. You'll see there are very, very few blue dots in here compared to the others. And there's some other colored dots in there. So at the most, this person may share a little Allen DNA, but not enough to belong in the cluster. I doubt she shares any at all, based on what I'm seeing here. So I need to remove her as well. So that's an easy way to do it. Just take your primary match, Mark all the shared matches according to your dot with your dot and assign it a name, and then check each one and see if they really belong or not. If their shared match list is full of the dot that you've chosen or not. Remove them or add them based on that. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the whole process of winnowing this down to just the people who belong, but there are a few more who should be taken out of it. Most of the people that I have listed here, what I could do is go back to my father's matches, and I could just cancel this search for Spivey and refine his matches. Now, it is on the paternal side only. That filter is still there. But I can also refine it down to that list I just created of blue dots of people in the cluster that I've assigned as Allen Deep. So I can go under shared DNA, sorry, not shared DNA, but under this groups thing and choose just the people who match Allen Deep or have that dot assigned to them. And let's see if I can, yeah, I have to apply it. Then I get just people with the blue dot. But when I've got my cluster down just to the people who belong in it, I should go through each of their family trees, including the ones that are unlinked, and try to find some connection that either connects directly to Allen's or that is shared with somebody else in the group or multiple people in the group. Maybe not have anything directly to do with Allen's that I can see at first, but if I pursue a shared family that multiple people in this cluster who belong in it actually have together, it will lead me back to relevant ancestors that connect to my Allen's in some way. Now, a lot of these shared matches don't have trees, or their trees are just inaccessible. So I probably, here's one with a locked tree, for example. Unless I get that person to communicate with me, I'm probably not going to be able to determine why they are in here. And I can do that through the messaging system. If I look at RV, for example, and I want to contact him, or I can do that and see if he'll respond to me and explain what I'm doing. And, hey, do you have any Allens, or do you have this other kind of a pattern in your family tree that would help explain why you're in this cluster? Because I'd really like to know what our common Allen ancestry is. And maybe you'll reply and maybe you won't. In fact, I've already sent this guy a message and he hasn't replied yet. So I think I just messed up here a little bit. Let's see what we're going to do. Let me get this reduced just a little bit. It's a little difficult maneuvering here. Can you still see that list of just the blue dot matches?
Yes.
I wanted to show you how to do some quick research on somebody. There are a lot of these people that I've just done some very, very quick research. And you see that I've actually made notes on them. Here's a match who also descends from Jonathan Allred and Nancy Allen. Here's one who descends from Nancy's sister, Elizabeth Allen McCaskill. And there's some other patterns in here that I'm going to summarize in a moment. But here's one that has very little to work with, okay? But even with this guy, you can actually do some research, even without his cooperation, his direct cooperation through messaging or something, and determine why he belongs in this cluster. And he does, because if you look at his shared matches, he's full of blue dots. You can see that as I scroll down, they're all over the place. All right, so why? Well, let's look at this tree. Now, he hasn't linked this tree to his results, so technically it may not have anything to do with it, but his username is vaccine. If you look at this tree, click on it, you can see that actually this is probably his family tree as far as he's developed it. He's got his father on there, and that's it. And all the detail we get is that his father was born in 1928. His name was Carl, and died in 2004. And you're like, Larry, for heaven's sake, why waste your time on this match? I mean, there are other people who have more developed family trees. Are you ever going to do enough research to find out why he belongs in the Allen DNA cluster? Well, you're going to be surprised. I'm going to go to the facts panel. It doesn't tell us much. All it has is the information that I just gave you, but it's enough in this case. If I click search on Ancestry, it's going to search for Carl vaccine through all the different databases and see if there are any other records that match that particular individual. And sure enough, there is a US Social Security Applications and Claims Index that shows somebody with roughly those dates, not exactly. There is this one. It is Chicago, Illinois, Cook County, Illinois, that has a Carl vaccine born in 1932. He's living as a boarder in this household. Apparently not he's not related to the people in the household, so that's not helping me. But because he's from Cook County, Illinois, I'm thinking I'm probably related to him, and his name is Vaccine. I'm thinking it's probably through his wife, the mother of the tester, that I probably am related. And that's just a good guess, because I don't have a lot of people in my family who went to Chicago. So what I think I did here was to check this associated record, this hint here for Carl Eugene Vaccine's marriage. It looks like he married in Arkansas in 1956 in Fort Smith. And I thought, okay, Linda Ruth Stuckey. Linda Ruth, now that could indeed be a relative of mine, and maybe this guy's related through his mother to me. I'm just going to take that chance. This first part of my research. When I click on her name, I get a bunch of hints over here, and one of them would be when she was just, if this is her, it would be when she was 5 years of age in the census record. And apparently she was the daughter of Denver Stuckey and Gladys Stuckey. Okay, this is just quick and dirty research. I'm not verifying anything yet. But if so, these are her parents. In this Find a Grave, Denver Oscar Stuckey and Gladys Ruth Stuckey. Looks like Gladys might have been a Burton. So what I'm going to do from this is, well, there's several things I could do. I could start a family tree for this couple and see if I can trace back to anybody that I can connect to my Allens. That might be the hard way to do it. Another way would be to continue doing this search on Ancestry, going down the different lineages and trying to trace who Gladys Ruth's ancestors were and who Denver Oscar's ancestors were. But I think one of the best things to potentially do is to go to the family search, One World Tree. You may have heard of this. Nowadays on Family Search, which you should all have an account with if you don't already, people who participate in the genealogy, the World Family Tree, they don't have their individual trees that they can keep to themselves. It's like a wiki tree that everybody is working on together and refining over time. And it's kind of a little bit chaotic. Sometimes people get into conflicts about, is this correct or is this not correct? Do these people belong together in the same family or don't they? But over time, people are beginning to come to some consensus. So that's why it's a good tree to use. And it sometimes contains more accurate information than you might find on the family trees on Ancestry and some other sites. But you can use other sites. You can use Genie or you can use WikiTree. I just think the family search tree is a little bit better. So if I take those two names, if I take Denver Oscar Stuckey and Gladys Ruth Burton, I can search for them on this tree that is existing now on, can you see family search page here? Do I need to switch? Do you see family search up in the left-hand corner? Okay, good. All I need to do is, this is the home page. all I need to go sign into my account, which you can get a free account at Family Search. It doesn't cost you any money. You don't have to pay any subscription fees. There are a lot of records on here too that you can use for your research within genetic genealogy and on other things. Go under the family tree tab and click find. So it's just one tree for all people, and there should just be one record ideally for these individuals in Vaccine's ancestry as I see it. All right, so let me make sure I get these names right. I've got them written down here. I'm going to move this out of the way. So I'm going to put in Linda's father, Linda Ruth. See if he appears. I'm going to add just a little bit more information. I'm going to add his spouse's name since I've got that provisionally. I'm going to put Gladys Burton. And then I'm just going to search and see if I get any results in this tree. You see, there is a record for Denver Oscar and his wife, Gladys Eula Burton. So these are supposedly the maternal grandparents of my match, or my father's match Vaccine. I'm going to click on Denver and go to his record. And I'm going to choose one of his children with Gladys if I can. If not, I'll have to look at their trees separately. But I think I can here. All right, here's Linda Ruth. I'm going to click on her. And I'm going to look at her tree. And there's a tree view up here. And look, it does both sides of her family tree right here. And I can just provisionally accept this. As it turns out, on Gladys Eula Burton's side, if I go up to Robert Franklin Burton and Martha Jane Hicks, I come to a familiar name, Elizabeth Allen, who married Gilbert Hicks. Now, this couple married in 1829 in Maury County, Tennessee. And I have multiple matches in this cluster who descend from Maury County, Tennessee Allens. This woman was almost certainly the daughter of James Allen and Judith Morgan, who moved from Moore County, North Carolina to Maury County, Tennessee. And that's why they're here. And that's why they're in this cluster. That's why Vaccine matches me. I wouldn't know that if I hadn't researched all the other trees that I could. In this case, this is part of a larger pattern I've noticed. So I can go back to Vaccine as my match and make a notation. See if I can, it's a lot of tabs back. I can actually add a note to him now that I've determined he's part of a pattern I've noticed before. Descended through likely mom from Elizabeth Allen, married 1829, Maury County, Tennessee. Gilbert Hicks, likely daughter of James Allen and Judith Morgan from Moore County, North Carolina. Now, James Allen was the son of Joseph Allen Jr., who was likely the brother of Samuel Allen, my ancestor. And that is the reason why I believe this Vaccine matches me. Now, look, I started out with one name in his family tree and a couple dates and a place. And just from that, in this case, I was able to find an explanation for this match that aligns with other people in the cluster. You know, one Allen descended match in a cluster in this case is not going to be very indicative because Allen is a very common name. But when you find 10, 15, 20 people in a cluster that descend from Maury County, Tennessee Allens, you know that the next time you find a Maury County, Tennessee Allen, that it is related to the situation. All right, so I'm going to try to get back to, now that I've shown you how to create a cluster, refine it down, attach a color dot to it, get rid of the people that don't belong, keep the people that do, and then start to research the family trees of the matches within the cluster to see what they're telling you about your common ancestors. Now I'm going to go back to my next slide and show you all the patterns I found in this particular cluster within the last couple of weeks that I refined down from my dad. Let's see. Now, can you see my slide again? Am I back to my slide?
Yes.
Good. All right.
No, I still see Larry, Kate, and vaccine.
Okay. I'm going to have to change where I am. Let me get back in here and share a different screen with you. All right, now we're back to slides, right? This is my father's primary match. Okay, here are all the patterns I detected in that light blue dot cluster. Okay, there's some known relatives like other descendants of Zilpha Allen Spivey, Nancy Allen Allred, Elizabeth Allen McCaskill, and John Allen, their brother who went to Tennessee and Texas. So some of the people in the cluster are of known relationship, and that's very reassuring. It shows that the DNA comes from their parents, down to my father and then down to all the other matches, or someone further back up the family tree on the Allen side, not on the right side. I found descendants of somebody named Nancy Allen, born about 1800 to 1802 in Montgomery County and married to a William Deaton. So somehow that Nancy Allen is very closely related to Samuel, probably a niece. Descendants of James Allen, who died about 1830 in Maury County, Tennessee, married Judith Morgan, like vaccine that we just saw. A lot of those people are in this cluster. So that just kind of verifies most likely that Joseph Allen Jr., who died in 1829 in Moore County, is a very close relative of Samuel Allen, my ancestor, probably his brother, as I've long suspected. I found a lot of descendants of Stephen Allen, who married Serena Saville and lived in Leake County, Mississippi. I mean, there are probably 20 of them in this cluster that I've been able to identify. So that Stephen Allen is most definitely somehow related to my Samuel Allen. There are descendants of a Rockingham County, North Carolina Allen family who used a lot of the same given names in their Allen family as I did, my Montgomery County family did. There are descendants of Daniel Allen and Sarah Caldwell, who lived in Montgomery and Randolph counties, North Carolina. And there are descendants of Nancy Allen, who married about 1850 John White Ferris of Callaway County, Kentucky. They were married in Henry County, Tennessee, and she was born in North Carolina. According to one of her son's death certificates, she was born in Rockingham County, North Carolina. And so she might be, it was that specific in Kentucky, that record was. So it's likely that she fits with the Rockingham County branch of the family. So it's related to my Samuel Allen somehow. And then there are descendants of, lots of descendants of Drury Richardson of Moore County, North Carolina in this group. It makes me believe that Drury, contrary to all the family trees out there, Drury married an Allen, I feel, or someone, further back did, but I think it's most likely him. Something that you probably couldn't get from any other source. So one thing I wanted to point out to you guys, based on all the patterns that I've just isolated for you, that there is a Y-DNA group that includes one member of my Allen family confirmed out at Family Tree DNA. This is the Y chromosome now we're talking about, not autosomal DNA across all the chromosomes, but just the Y chromosome that males carry. And so it descends down the direct male line from father to son to grandson to great-grandson, pretty much intact for over many generations, maybe as long as 500 years ago. And everybody descended from the same Allen family is going to match each other if they're males and descended in the direct male line with no interruptions. Well, in this case, the member of my family in this blue group, there's a little headline there that's blue, and it says Wiltshire and progenitors of the House of Dunkeld, Kings of Scotland. Don't get too excited about that, by the way. That's our subgroup S. One of these guys right here is descended, according to him, from George Allen, who died 1847 between Troy and Starr, North Carolina. Now, that's a very close relative, probably a brother of my Samuel Allen. Look at some of the other people in here. There is a descendant of Stephen Allen / Saville. So that is that Stephen Allen that lived in Leake County, Mississippi, who so many of his descendants are in my Allen cluster. And then there is a descendant in here of Valentine Allen, who died in Indiana, who is from the Rockingham County Allens. So in terms of Y-DNA, they match as well. And some of the people who trace furthest back in this Allen group trace it back to Stafford County, Virginia. And indeed, if you go back to colonial Stafford County, Virginia, you will find Allens with many of the same given names as my Allens, John and William and Samuel and George, Joseph, and Reuben. All those names, they used in Montgomery County, they used them in Rockingham County. So the point of this is I can use all of these patterns that I found within my Allen cluster to research further back in time along these different lineages and try to find a point of connection between my Allens and the other Allens in the group, Allen descendants. And I can be confident that they are all sharing the same DNA because ultimately they have the same deep Allen ancestry as my ancestor. With a name like Allen, without these DNA helps, what would I do in trying to trace it back from 1750s Montgomery County when my ancestor first arrived there? It's probably Samuel's father, Joseph Sr., first arrived there. How would I get back further than that without guidance like this from autosomal DNA and Y-DNA? And it's not just the Y-DNA that's helpful, it's also the autosomal DNA. So now I hope this demonstration proves enlightening and that it has you feeling encouraged to follow suit with your own results and attempt this yourself. I'll just warn you that you'll never learn until you put this into practice, and watching me do it or somebody else do it will never be enough. You have to really do it yourself, and over time it will grow easier and easier for you. If you'd like to see other examples from me, there are videos that we've done as part of my job at the library on our YouTube channel, which is called Heritage Deep Dive. That's Heritage Deep Dive again. And there's one video on an 18th century mystery that I solved in my ancestry with a grandmother I couldn't identify. And then there's without DNA help. And then there's also another one for a 19th century female ancestor of one of my patrons at the library using her DNA results that I was able to identify. It was actually her great-great-grandmother. And that one was really quite easy, except the records posed some problems. But eventually I got a hint as to, in this case, it was a great-great-grandmother who had come from North Carolina to Virginia, married before, after 1880 and before 1890, and then died shortly after 1900. We had a marriage record that did not really identify her parents. And in the 1880 census, she was living as a servant in Virginia with another household to whom she was unrelated. So how to find out what family she came from in North Carolina, and using the patron's autosomal DNA results, we were able to determine it, and then a likely answer to that question. And then we actually found the record to prove it. And there was only one little frail strand of evidence, but it was enough to prove it. So this really does work. And it does work potentially back to, if you have the right DNA, to someone who lived in the early to mid 1700s potentially. So are there questions that I can answer for you?
I do have a question. So when you're looking at ancestors that may be for generations removed from you, about how much shared DNA do you expect to have? I know it's a wide range, but is it like the 20 centimorgan range, or?
If you're saying 4 generations removed, like to second great grandparents or so, it's going to be a lot more than that. It's going to be, and the way you can tell is that there's something called the Shared Centimorgan Project that you can find online. There's a chart associated with it that will show you a range of possible links or extents of DNA that you would share with an individual for each relationship. And with that, you might be looking more in, depending on how closely related, it could be over 100 centimorgans, but it's something I don't remember without looking at the chart, but you can always tell. And it's not an exact figure, it's a range. You can share a little bit more, a little bit less than expected. The Shared Centimorgan project is based on real-time observations, people of known relationship to one another, and how much or how little DNA they can share per relationship. So it's a range, but far more than the values that we were dealing with here, because we were dealing with people who were related much further back than that.
So around 20 centimorgans, how far back would that be?
It could be as far back as, 6, 7, or 8 generations ago. It could be a little bit closer than that as well.
Okay.
Can I ask a
Thank you.
question? Right at the beginning, you talked about documenting your own genome so that when you found others, you could slot them into whatever segment they matched.
Right.
Can you just clarify that again for me? I was struggling to get my head around that.
So potentially you could have you could use a lot of your close matches on a site where you can actually look at what segments you share on which chromosomes and how long those segments are with exact coordinates. And you could use that to map your chromosomes by color, by length, in association with different branches of your family tree. And there's a tool that you can use called, what is it called? DNA Painter, right?
DNA Painter, okay.
DNA Painter, you can use that tool to create this map over time, but you have to have those coordinates and you have to have that visualization possibility that you can't get at AncestryDNA.
No, you have to do it somewhere else.
Yeah, you have to do it at one of the other testing services like FamilyTreeDNA or MyHeritage.
Is that a tier 1? No, that's GEDmatch. Yeah.
GEDmatch, you could use GEDmatch to do it. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a laborious process, but once you have done it, anytime that you have a match in that sector of your genome, and you can place it there physically, if it's on the right side of the family, mother or father, that it has to be from that lineage that you're related.
Yeah, and that was really good. The other thing is I checked on my ancestry and my paternal side, which is what we're talking about with the Allreds. I have, because you said that Ancestry has the vast majority of testing cases. I've got relatives in southern Midwestern Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. I'm thinking, okay. I mean, I've got Victoria and Australia as well, but they're the main ones. I just thought, wow, that really does reinforce that Allred side of the family.
Yes, it does, but the common ancestor is going to be so far back in time for almost anyone in America.
Yeah.
That autosomal DNA is going to be useless. You're going to need to find some matches from British families that are more closely related.
Yeah, and that's why I've got my brother's Y-DNA as well. I did that deliberately because I knew I wouldn't be able to get the autosomal. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Sure. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you use the DNA GEDCOM client to automatically create the clusters effectively? Isn't that one of its capabilities? Are you familiar with that?
GEDCOM client.
DNA GEDCOM?
I'm not. What service offers that? Which testing service?
It's not a testing service. It's actually a separate entity, but they have a client that'll download DNA data and match data from Ancestry and MyHeritage and Family Tree, and a host of other tools that I haven't had time to really examine yet. But I was thinking one of them might have been an autocluster tool.
Okay, but I doubt that Ancestry would allow that. If they're not aware of it though yet, maybe they haven't sent a cease and desist like they did with the auto clustering tool from Genetic Affairs.
Yeah, that's what surprised me a little bit when you mentioned that earlier. Whether or not they were blocked or if they were somehow getting away with it or something like that.
They have a limited amount of time. If you can do it, do it. Please tell me if you could do it that way too, because I don't know, but I would like to do it again. I have done an auto clustering with Ancestry before they cut all this off. But there's so many more testers now involved that, you know, I could stand to do a complete rerun of that. So I don't
Okay,
know.
yeah, I'll give it another run and take a look at it. And if you've got your contact information somewhere in this Zoom or something, I can drop you a note.
Okay, thank you. My email address, by the way, if you have questions after this, it's Larry.Cates, LARRY.CATES @highpointnc.gov, HIGHPOINT, highpointnc.gov. Okay. So if some of you are a little shy to ask me a question now, you can ask me by email. And you can tell me all about this tool, because I really want to try to use it before it is discovered. They will shut it down, believe me, if they find out about it and it can do this.
Okay, everybody be really quiet till we find out.
Exactly. Don't tell anybody.
Larry, it does exist, and I've used it regularly for some time. The tool, you have to download, you have to go to dnagedcom.com and subscribe to their service. I think it's about $60 a year. And then you download a client onto your computer. And then you can set up what directory you want to save a file into. You go to collect your data. You say you want to collect from Ancestry, and then you log in to your Ancestry account from
Okay.
your computer.
All right.
And then this client will pull the data down onto your computer. And then you can go to another screen in that client and do the Collins leads method of clustering, which generates a cluster very similar to the genetic affairs cluster. And they also send you spreadsheets of all the data that's attached on the bottom of the genetic affairs clusters.
So that might be the difference, that you are not providing this service with your credentials to get into Ancestry. You are doing the signing in yourself, and
Right.
maybe Ancestry will permit that. That's great, because if you can cut out the clustering aspect of this, where you don't have to sort and check each match against its shared matches, that saves you so much time. So I recommend that you all give this a chance. I'm definitely going to, and thank you for bringing it up, both of you. You know, if some way we could get this to Linda and have her share it with everybody, that'd be great, because that's annoying to me, that you have to do all this extra work to sort the clusters yourself. It's hard enough going through the clusters and looking for the patterns and doing the research on all the family trees to find those patterns. But you know, that's half the work gone if you can do some kind of automatic clustering. All right, anybody else? I learned something here tonight. I learned something great. Thank you.
I'm sure there's lots more questions. My brain's reeling a bit and I need to play around with Ancestry
Sure.
and see where I'm going with it.
All right.
So
if you want to watch this again, Linda is recording it, and she will be posting it, and I will be posting it on our YouTube channel at the library, the Heritage Deep Dive. Plus you can find the 2 other videos about this.
okay, thank you.
With different example.
Because
Okay.
that's a lot of information to take in.
It is, but you know, it's not a hard process. It is a laborious process,
It's laborious, yeah.
but not any more laborious than all the work you've already done and haven't been able to find the answer.
No, that's true. That's
This
true.
could point you somewhere definite.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Mhm. All right.
Larry, I posted the URL to dnagedcom in the chat window.
Oh, great. Okay, I see it. Yeah, everybody take a look at that. If you want to do this, definitely that would be a first step for me, so as to avoid some of this labor. Thank you.
also posted Larry's email address on the chat in case anyone didn't get it earlier.
Thanks, Linda.
Okay, let's see if I can stop share and get this back.
Larry, tell everybody that, because some people are hesitant about contacting you, but you get credit for working with people on a one-to-one basis through your work. Can you tell everybody about that and invite them to contact you?
Well, I'm a reference librarian. So what that means is, and I'm exclusively in local and family history. So when you send me a question, I'm not using my own time to answer your question. I'm using the library's time, and it counts as reference statistics.
Yes.
So I can't do everything for you, but I can't take on too much work for you. Some of you can attest that I am willing to help to a pretty extensive level. Just don't abuse it, but yeah, I'll answer your questions.
Okay.
What type of questions could you answer? For example, my question is, I found out about an Allred type of inheritance to, taking a DNA match or DNA test, I should say. And so I've noticed that there seems to be a link between the Allreds, I should say, the Coods and the Horners is what the common one I'm looking for. So I'm trying to fill in the gap as to who, that shared or common ancestor might be, and just searching for the connection.
Sometimes I do take a look at people's DNA results and try to discern why there is what if there's a cluster there and what the explanation potentially for it is. With Horner, of course, that's definitely going to have something to do with John Allred, who died in 1792, because his daughter married a Horner and they moved out to Tennessee. And with Linda, for example, we've done work on her family to show that she is connected to that John Allred who died in 1792, and she has. You don't mind my saying this, I'm sure, Linda.
Oh, no.
But her father has numerous matches to the daughters of John Allred who went to Tennessee. And that was one way we were able to define a cluster for her and determine probably what lineage she came through, and using it in concert, in this case, with yDNA, because there is that one branch of the Allred family who the males in that line matched the Finley name. That can only be through John Allred, who died in 1792. Because his father was Samuel Finley, and we found the documentary evidence for that. And all of his descendants come from that, are matching that Finley name in their DNA results, not the Allred name. John Allred's mother was an Allred, his father was Samuel Finley. The Coods, of course, live very close by. And I think it's pretty interesting that John Allred Jr. married Lily Ann, and that is a Cood name too.
I will talk to you later because I have tons of questions. And at first I wasn't quite sure of this Allred connection in my DNA matches because I only had like 3, but I got I got my distant cousin's DNA matches, and she has tons of Allreds because it comes from both her mom and father lineage. And so I'm able to compare, the similarities from that. So I don't think it's just a coincidence. I think there's an actual true connection. And hers, they tend to go all the way out west to Utah. I don't have DNA matches that go out that far. Mine go to Tennessee or Missouri, but hers will actually connect to living people living in Utah.
Yeah, and in my case, with my father's matches, It's very, very clear that there was some early genealogical connection between the Allreds and the Longs as well. Tobias Long and his descendants. We're related with an autosomal DNA cluster to multiple descendants of the Long family that was in early Randolph County. So I don't know whether it is that an Allred married a Long early on or a Long married an Allred, but it definitely happened probably in Cecil County or Chester County. So yeah, there's something there. You know, I have lots of clusters that I dealt with that I can see the patterns, but I can't explain them. I even know what line they're up, of course, you know, on my family tree, but I can't make the precise connection because the records are too sparse in the place where it would have happened. So for my Ruth family, for example, I know that there is some New England connection on the Ruth side way back early on that goes back to family that settled in Long Island and moved to New Jersey. And the Ruths were in New Jersey too. But I cannot, through documentation, because there's so little of it in colonial New Jersey for people who didn't own land and they seem to have rented theirs like so many people who lived in New Jersey. I probably won't be able to identify the precise connection, but I've got so many matches in the Swayze family. I am somehow descended from the Swayzes and the Luces and the Burtons through the Ruths.
Going back
Thank
to
you.
the John Allred who married Lily Ann, and Lily Ann being a cooed name, a lot of family trees, including mine, claim that she was Lily Ann Julian. But in truth, I personally have never seen any documentation to prove what her family name was. Donnell Griffin had said it was Julian, and I think I just sort of took her word at it, and I never have gone back and done the research. So I think, you know, if someone came up and told me that she was actually a cood, I wouldn't be able to argue because I've never seen any documentation to prove she wasn't a cood.
Right. And, you know, there are a lot of old myths and presumptions that people made over the years that they get stuck, you know, and they're wrong. They're wrong. Let me tell you something. DNA is never wrong. It's never wrong. If it's telling you something, pay attention. Somebody has made a mistake. Don't take the word of any antiquated source, unverified, undocumented family history, or even a family tradition that is being contradicted by DNA. Go with the DNA.
How reliable would you say that the trees on Ancestry are? Because I've got I'm having a fight with a family cousin because I'm convinced he's got the wrong parents. But the DNA, he's linked the families on Ancestry, so it looks like they're all linked by DNA, but I just think it's the wrong one.
I wouldn't take, go ahead.
The family trees, yeah, the family trees are only as good as the research done to prove those names.
And a lot of them are
If
just
I
copying each other.
There's
Yeah,
a name that he's very briefly saying that her father is Nathaniel. There is no Nathaniel in the family anywhere else. But when I'm saying his father was Joseph and Lucy, and there's Lucys everywhere, but there's no Nathaniels or Catherines. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, if I listened to the family trees on Ancestry, I'd still be connected to that William Wright that Larry was talking about, or the Elizabeth Wright that Larry was talking about, but it's just Larry and I, and Larry's fantastic. He's helped me prove that it's not.
Yeah.
And one of the
so-
reasons I keep expanding as many Allred lines as I can on that Allred family DNA tree that Linda has posted, on her website, is so that, first off, I was using it to connect all my father's DNA matches to it. to, prove what our Allred line was after we discovered we were Allreds through Y-DNA testing. The others that are descendant of the other 3 lines from Solomon, I'll probably never find a DNA, connection to, but making the tree available to others, if they know what line they're in, they're able to go in and use that tree to build their lines and connect their DNA, or try and connect as many of their DNA matches to it. Yeah, I'm managing about 20 or so folks' DNA match lists. Been building trees for a lot of the other Allred cousins, and I'm always happy to pitch in and help solve whatever mysteries you might have in your trees if anyone needs it. So
I like Family Search's unified tree. I was very skeptical of it to start with as a wiki tree, but as time has gone on, I mean, we all know that the LDS Church is, their old website was a byword for inaccuracy when it came to the family histories involved. But now that they've got it open, one tree for everyone, and technically one record for every person who ever lived, who's ancestral to anyone who's living today, everybody can go in on that and change it. And I found, well, of course there are conflicts and people dispute what's true and what's not. But I found that if you got good evidence and you go in and put your evidence in the fields there under your ancestor's name and say, this is why I think this is true and this connection is true, people are very loath to change that if it looks convincing, even if it comes down from some antiquated source that was unverified. They're probably going to think twice about changing your work. And over time, I think it's going to be a good tool to come to some consensus about things. If people will show their work, that's the key. You need to show documentation when you're working on a family tree, and you judge a tree's accuracy by its documentation.
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking now. Just if I've got it right. I know I've got it right. Anyway.
There are some people that you're not going to convince, no matter how much documentation you show them, because they've made up their mind that what they've got is accurate. And that's it.
This is not part of the Allred family. This is just another branch. It's my mother's side, but yes, I am having a discussion. Let me say a robust discussion.
Yeah.
That's another good thing on that wiki tree, though, is there's a place under each person to have a discussion. Like before you place anything definitive on there, you can discuss under there with different people about why you think this or why you don't think this is correct.
I think some people take the easy one because it looks, well, it is easy. It's all there just because the dates are 3 or 4 years out. And, there's no other anyway. I think there is a way of just taking it the easy way. And I just think that's really not my way. We'll see.
No, good. I'm glad to hear that. You shouldn't take the easy way.
No.
I
Okay.
use an example that I could create a family tree on Ancestry and make it look really good. That I'm the love child of Elvis Presley and Queen Elizabeth, and trace my tree back through George Washington and Cleopatra and all the way back, and post it on Ancestry, and people will copy it. And then
It's on
their
family
DNA
search
will,
wrong as well.
yep, their DNA will match mine,
Yeah.
and you can't argue with DNA, but then they'll look at my tree and they'll go, oh my God, I'm related to Elvis Presley. I'm related to George Washington. And they'll argue with you about it, knowing good and well, George Washington didn't have any children. You can't be descended from him.
That's when you should be
Yeah.
more skeptical than ever, is when somebody connects you to someone famous. If it feels too good, then you should think twice about it before you adopt it.
Well, it's just too easy, I think. It's every instinct of mine says it's wrong. And yet on Family Search, they've got it as this other person, but every instinct is saying it's wrong. It's just not right. And the problem was she was murdered. And on her death certificate, it just said the year she was born and on her marriage certificate, there's no father. So there's no paper trail to dispute it. So people have just chosen what looks like an easy one, which does fit, but I just don't think it's right. Anyway, that's enough of mine. Thank you. I need to go. I get on with my day. It's 11:20 in the morning here. So I need to move on. Thank you so much. That was really good, Larry. It was great. And thanks, Linda and everybody. And thanks, Mike. Brilliant.
It's good to meet you.
Take care. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I love the internet. We can sit there and have people from Australia join people in Grantham, North Carolina, where I'm at. Anyone else have questions or comments? Larry Peck, you've been awfully quiet tonight. He's trying to figure out how to unmute himself right now. I can tell by looking at him.
Trying to figure out what button to push.
Okay, well, if no one else has any more questions, then Larry Cates, I'm going to thank you very, very much for doing this. And as soon as Zoom tells me that the recording is ready, I will let you know.
Okay. All right.
And so you can post it, and I'll post it on the myallredfamily.com and put the notice on Facebook.
I'll get up with you tomorrow about it when I get to work. Okay, Linda?
Sounds good. Sounds
All
good.
right. Thank you.
Okay. We'll see everybody next time.
Good night.
Bye.